The garage was George's sanctuary, a place where the past was not just remembered, but lived. The air was thick with the holy scent of sawdust, old oil, and the faint, lingering perfume of the lavender Maria had always kept by the window. At 74, George moved through this space with the quiet reverence of a man in his own cathedral. He was restoring a small, elegant writing desk, his gnarled, capable hands moving with a practiced grace, coaxing life back into the tired wood. Each stroke of the sandpaper was a conversation with his late wife. The purr of a high-end engine, followed by the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, was a sound that had become increasingly unwelcome. It was Alex. His son, at 40, was a man sculpted by a different, harsher light. He emerged from his sleek, graphite gray sedan, not in the cashmere of a relaxed weekend, but in the sharp, tailored lines of a man perpetually at war with the world. He didn't enter the garage. He stood at its threshold, a sentinel of modern disapproval, his arms crossed. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying the weary weight of a man about to perform an unpleasant but necessary duty. "We need to talk." George switched off the orbital sander, the sudden silence amplifying the tension. "I'm listening, Alex." "This," Alex began, with a sweeping gesture that encompassed not just the garage but the entire property. "This can't continue. It's not sustainable." "I'm not sure I follow," George said, his voice calm, though a familiar knot was tightening in his stomach. "The house, Dad. The property taxes, the upkeep, the insurance. It's a drain. Chloe and I have been running the numbers. We can't afford to keep subsidizing it." The word subsidizing landed like a stone. George had never asked for a penny. He lived on his pension and the modest returns from his investments, but he knew Alex and his wife Chloe had taken over managing his larger bills a year ago, insisting it was easier for them to handle online. He had seen it as a gesture of care, albeit a controlling one. Now he saw it for what it was, a ledger. "I didn't realize I was a subsidy," George said quietly. Alex sighed, the sound of a man burdened by the irrationality of his elders. "It's not personal. It's business. It's logistics. We found a place for you. A very nice place. Oakwood Meadows. It's one of those elite retirement communities. It has a golf course. You'd be comfortable." George stared at his son. This was new. The complaints about the garage were familiar, but this was an eviction notice. "And what happens to my home?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. "We sell it," Alex said, his tone brisk, businesslike. "The market is at its peak. It makes financial sense. The proceeds will cover your expenses at Oakwood for years. It's the smart move, Dad. It's for your own good." "My own good," George repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Yes, and the first step," Alex continued, his gaze falling upon the garage with renewed distaste, "is to get this property ready for sale. That means clearing out this fire trap. I've already made the arrangements. A disposal company is coming on Monday to clear it out. We need to present a clean, uncluttered property to potential buyers." George felt the floor shift beneath his feet. It wasn't just about the garage anymore. It was about his life. They were liquidating his life. He looked at his son, at the hard, determined set of his jaw, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the boy he had taught to ride a bike, the young man he had proudly sent to college. This was a corporate raider, and the company being raided was his own existence. He wanted to fight, to yell, to throw the man out of his sanctuary. But a lifetime of quiet wisdom, A lesson learned from Maria held him back. Never let your opponent see your strategy. He needed time. He let his shoulders slump, adopting the mask of weary defeat he knew Alex expected to see. "You've thought of everything, haven't you?" he murmured. "I'm just trying to take care of you, Dad," Alex said, his voice softening now that he had met no resistance. He saw not a warrior, but a tired old man who had finally accepted the inevitable. George looked around the garage, at the tools, the wood, the ghosts of 1,000 happy hours. He felt a surge of cold, clear-headed rage. They thought they were closing a chapter. They had no idea he was about to start a whole new book. "All right, Alex," he said, his voice a quiet whisper of surrender. "If you think it's for the best." The relief on his son's face was palpable. He had won. The problem was solved. He clapped his father on the shoulder, a gesture of magnanimous victory. "I knew you'd see reason, Dad. It's for the best. You'll see." He turned and walked away, getting back into his graphite gray car, a successful man who had just closed another difficult but necessary deal. He drove off, leaving George standing in the doorway of his condemned sanctuary. George stood there until the sound of the engine faded completely. He was not defeated. He was not broken. He was a man who had just been handed a declaration of war, and in the quiet, sacred space of his garage, surrounded by the memories of his wife, he began, with cold, meticulous precision, to plan his counterattack. As the sun set, casting long, melancholic shadows across the garage, George did not mourn. He began to prepare. The ultimatum had not broken him. It had focused him. He moved through the familiar, cluttered space, his mind a whirlwind of memories. But now each memory was a piece of a puzzle he was rapidly assembling. He thought of Maria, not with the soft ache of grief, but with a sharp, profound admiration for her foresight. She had always seen the man Alex was becoming, long before George had been willing to admit it. "He has your ambition, my love," she used to say, "but he lacks your foundation. He wants to build the skyscraper without bothering to dig the cellar." Her words had been prophetic. Alex saw the house and the garage as assets on a balance sheet. He had no concept of the foundation upon which they were built. The true story of their inheritance was not one of hidden jewels or gold coins. It was a story of quiet, canny investment and a deep-seated belief in the power of innovation. Maria's Aunt Elspeth had not been a collector of antiques. She had been an early and surprisingly astute investor in the burgeoning tech scene of the 1980s. Her legacy was not a box of trinkets, but a portfolio of stock certificates and a handful of small, obscure startups. After her death, George, a man of practical, tangible skills, had wanted to sell them. "It's just paper, Maria," he had argued. "Let's use the money to build a proper extension on the house." But Maria, with her artist's intuition, had seen something else. She had spent weeks researching the companies, reading their mission statements, studying their founders. She had a gift for seeing the potential in things others overlooked. She convinced George to hold on to them. "Not all of them will succeed, George," she had said, "but one of them might just change the world." She was right. Over the years, most of the companies had folded or been bought out for pennies. But one, a small, ambitious software company called Innovate Dynamics, had not only survived, but thrived. It had grown from a two-man operation in a garage to a quiet, powerful force in the world of enterprise software and patent holding. The stock certificates, representing a significant and now controlling interest in this quiet giant, were their secret treasure. And their hiding place was a stroke of Maria's particular genius. It was not the workbench itself, but an old, rusty, and utterly unremarkable metal toolbox that sat beneath it. It was dented, its clasps were stiff, and it was filled with a collection of mismatched, grimy-looking wrenches and sockets. It was the one thing in the garage that looked truly like junk. "Alex only values what glitters," Maria had said with a wry smile as they carefully fitted the certificates into a false bottom they had constructed inside the toolbox. He would sell this for $5 at a yard sale without a second thought. He will never, ever look inside a rusty old box. Her words, spoken with love but tinged with a clear-eyed assessment of their son's character, now echoed in George's mind with the force of a prophecy. Alex was about to prove her right in the most spectacular way possible. George knew he couldn't just take the toolbox and leave. That would be too simple, too clean. Alex's lesson needed to be more personal, more visceral. He needed to believe he had found a treasure, only to have it snatched away. He needed to feel the thrill of victory before the agony of defeat. So, George created a decoy. He went into the house and retrieved a small, velvet-lined box from the back of Maria's closet. Inside were a few pieces of her costume jewelry, a silver locket, a pair of elegant but not particularly valuable pearl earrings, a delicate silver filigree brooch. They were things she had worn to parties, pretty but not precious. He took these items back to the garage. He didn't hide them well. He placed them in the top drawer of an old wooden filing cabinet, tucked beneath a stack of yellowed receipts. It was a place a cursory search would easily uncover. This would be the treasure Alex would find. This would be the source of his brief, foolish triumph. As he closed the drawer on the decoy, a cold, hard certainty settled over him. He was not just protecting his and Maria's legacy. He was setting a trap designed to catch not a mouse, but the inflated ego of his own son. He was baiting the hook with a few $1,000s worth of trinkets in order to protect a fortune and teach a lesson that was, in its own way, priceless. The stage was set for a tragedy of Alex's own making. With the decoy in place, George's actions took on a new, deliberate urgency. This was no longer just about protecting the past. It was about strategically shaping the future. He knew he couldn't simply disappear with the toolbox. He needed to lay the groundwork for the lesson to come, and that required a few crucial, quiet maneuvers. His first call was not to a lawyer, but to his old friend and former broker, a man named Arthur Vance. Arthur was retired now, but his mind was as sharp as ever. "George, it's been too long." Arthur's voice crackled over the line. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I need some information, Arthur," George said, getting straight to the point. "About Innovate Dynamics." "Innovate? Haven't thought about them in years. The quiet giant. What about them?" "I need a current valuation of my stock," George said, "and I need to know the exact legal ramifications of a change of primary residence for a majority shareholder. There should be a clause in the original corporate charter, Section 12, I believe." There was a pause, then a low whistle from Arthur. "Section 12? The poison pill clause? George, what are you planning?" "Just exploring my options," George said calmly. "Can you get me the information?" "Quietly." "For you, George." "Of course." I'll have to make a few calls, pull some old strings, but I'll have it for you by tomorrow." His next call was to his neighbor, Sam Peterson. Sam was a retired mechanic, a man whose hands were as calloused as George's, a man who understood the value of things that were built to last. "Sam," George said, "I need a favor, a big one. I need to store something at your place for a while, something important, and I need you to not ask any questions." "Say no more, George," Sam replied without hesitation. "My garage is your garage. You know that." That evening, under the cover of darkness, George performed the most painful part of his strategic retreat. He lifted the old, rusty toolbox from its place under the workbench. It was heavy, not just with the weight of the metal and the paper within, but with the weight of 50 years of secrets and dreams. He carried it across his backyard, through the gap in the hedge that separated his property from Sam's, and placed it in the back of Sam's quiet, orderly garage behind a stack of old tires. "It's safe here," Sam said, clapping him on the shoulder, "whatever it is." "Thank you, Sam," George said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I owe you." "You don't owe me a thing," Sam said. "That's what neighbors are for." Returning to his own garage, George felt a profound sense of loss. The space was still full of his tools and his projects, but its heart was gone. He had sacrificed a piece of his own history to protect its core. He spent the rest of Sunday in a state of quiet contemplation. He didn't work. He simply sat in Maria's armchair, absorbing the atmosphere of the place for the last time. He ran his hand over the smooth, worn wood of the half-finished writing desk. He breathed in the familiar scent of sawdust and oil. He was saying goodbye, not just to a building, but to a version of himself, the man who had believed that love and loyalty were things that could be passed down as easily as a set of tools. Late that night, Arthur Vance called back. "George," he said, his voice a low, excited whisper, "you're not going to believe this. Innovate Dynamics has been on a tear. Their patent portfolio is a gold mine. Your shares, George, your shares are worth, conservatively, north of $50 million. George closed his eyes, the number almost too large to comprehend. "And Section 12?" he asked. "It's exactly as you remembered," Arthur said, "clear as day. If a majority shareholder's primary registered property is sold, it triggers an immediate review of all subsidiary and patent licensing agreements. It gives you, as the activating shareholder, the right to call an emergency board meeting and reevaluate any and all contracts. George, you don't just own the company. You hold a loaded gun to the head of anyone who depends on its technology." A slow, cold smile spread across George's face. The trap was not just set, it was armed with a nuclear warhead. On Monday morning, as the sun rose, George took one last walk through his garage. He left the decoy and the silver trinkets in the filing cabinet drawer. He left the tools on the wall. He left the half-finished projects on the benches. He left the ghost of his life for his son to pick over. He took nothing with him except the clothes on his back and a small duffel bag with a few essentials. As he walked out the door for the last time, he did not feel like a man being evicted. He felt like a general leaving a battlefield, confident that the mines he had laid would do their work. He was not just sacrificing his garage. He was sacrificing his son's ignorance, and the price of that lesson, he knew, would be devastating. The arrival of the J&B disposal truck on Monday morning felt, to Alex, like a profound and satisfying victory. He stood on the back porch of his father's house, a mug of artisanal coffee in his hand, and watched as the two workmen began their methodical desecration of the garage. It was the end of an era of clutter, of dust, of the silent, reproachful presence of his father's past. It was, he thought, a cleansing. He supervised the process with the detached efficiency of a project manager. He felt no sentiment, no pang of regret. He saw only the swift, satisfying execution of a necessary task. The old tools were tossed into a rusty bin with a discordant clang. The stacks of lumber were unceremoniously hauled away. The half-finished writing desk, which had been the object of his father's affection just days before, was splintered and thrown into the back of the truck. "Make sure you get everything," he called out to the foreman. "I want this place swept clean." It was about an hour into the job when one of the workers, a young man with a bored expression, opened the drawer of the old wooden filing cabinet. "Hey, boss," he called out. "Found something." He brought a small, velvet-lined box over to Alex. Inside lay the silver locket, the pearl earrings, and the filigree brooch. Alex took the box, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. Had his father really been so senile that he'd forgotten about these? He had specifically told him to remove anything of value. "Just put it aside," he said, his tone dismissive. He didn't think much of it at first. It was probably just costume jewelry, more of his mother's sentimental clutter. But as the clean-out continued, a small, nagging curiosity began to grow. After the truck had rumbled away, leaving behind a shockingly bare, soulless concrete slab, Alex went back into the house. He sat at the kitchen table and examined the contents of the box more closely. The pieces were tarnished, but they had a certain weight, a certain elegance. They didn't look cheap. On a whim, he decided to take them to a local jeweler for an appraisal. He told himself it was just to satisfy his curiosity, to confirm that it was, indeed, junk. The jeweler, a meticulous man with a magnifying glass permanently affixed to his eye, laid the pieces out on a black velvet cloth. He examined them in silence, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said finally, looking up at Alex, "they are lovely pieces. The pearls are cultured, not exceptional, but nice. The locket is sterling silver. The brooch is the most interesting. It's a nice example of Edwardian filigree work." "So, what are they worth?" Alex asked, a note of impatience in his voice. The jeweler pursed his lips. "As a lot, I could probably offer you, let's say, $3,000. The number was not life-changing, but it was significant. $3,000. For a handful of trinkets he'd almost allowed to be thrown into a landfill. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Alex's face. He had been right all along. The old man was sitting on valuable assets, letting them rot in a dusty garage. He, Alex, with his sharp, modern sensibilities, had been the one to unlock that value. He felt a surge of self-satisfaction. He was not just a good son, taking care of his aging father. He was a smart businessman, maximizing the potential of an underperforming asset. He pictured his father, wherever he was, probably moping in some cheap motel room. He felt a pang of something that almost resembled pity. The old man had no idea what he had possessed. That evening, he called Chloe, his voice full of smug satisfaction. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I found some of Mom's old jewelry in the garage. Just a few pieces. I had them appraised. They're worth $3,000. $3,000? Chloe was impressed. Just sitting in that dusty old box? Exactly, Alex said, laughing. Can you imagine? He had no idea. It just goes to show we did the right thing. He's not capable of managing his own affairs anymore. It's a good thing we stepped in. He felt a warm glow of vindication. This small discovery was proof that his plan, the sale of the house, the move to the retirement community, was not just necessary, but righteous. He had saved his father from his own incompetence. He sold the jewelry to the dealer the next day, the cash a satisfyingly thick wad in his pocket. He took Chloe out to a fancy dinner to celebrate their small, secret victory. As they sat in the expensive restaurant, sipping champagne, Alex felt powerful, in control. He had handled a difficult family situation with grace and business acumen. He had tidied up the past, secured the future, and even turned a small profit in the process. He raised his glass to his wife, a triumphant smile on his face. He was the victor. He had won. He had no idea that the game had not even begun. He had taken the bait, swallowed it whole, and the hook was now firmly, irrevocably set. With the $3,000 from the inheritance serving as a pleasant little bonus, Alex moved forward with the sale of his father's house with renewed vigor and a clear conscience. He saw himself as a paragon of filial responsibility, a modern son efficiently managing the messy affairs of an aging parent for everyone's benefit. He listed the house with an aggressive, high-end real estate agent who promised a quick sale. The house, a charming, well-maintained bungalow in a desirable neighborhood, was an easy sell. Within 2 weeks, they had a cash offer from a young family, and the closing was scheduled for the end of the month. Alex handled all the paperwork, his signature flowing confidently across the documents. He felt a deep, satisfying sense of accomplishment. He had successfully liquidated a stagnant asset and was now poised to reinvest the capital in a more sensible way, namely, paying off his own mountain debts and funding the down payment on a larger, more impressive house for himself and Chloe. The day the sale closed was a day of celebration. The money, a significant 6-figure sum, appeared in his bank account. He took Chloe out for another expensive dinner, this time toasting to their new, unburdened future. His father's problem was solved. The next morning, Alex was in his sleek, minimalist office, reviewing quarterly reports for his tech company, Miller Innovations. He felt on top of the world. He was a successful CEO, a savvy real estate investor, and a responsible son. At precisely 10:15 a.m., his assistant buzzed him. "Mr. Miller, there's a Mr. Vance on the line for you. He says it's urgent." Alex frowned. He didn't know any Vance. "Fine, put him through." "Mr. Alex Miller?" The voice on the other end was old, but sharp as a razor. "My name is Arthur Vance. I am the legal representative for the majority shareholder of a company called Innovate Dynamics." "Innovate Dynamics?" Alex repeated, the name vaguely familiar but not immediately placing it. "I'm sorry, I don't think we have any business with them." "Oh, I believe you do," Vance said, a note of dry amusement in his voice. "You see, Mr. Miller, your company, Miller Innovations, has, for the past 5 years, been operating under a technology licensing agreement with Innovate Dynamics, an agreement that allows you to use several of their key patents in your software architecture." A cold knot began to form in Alex's stomach. He remembered the agreement now. It had been a standard, boilerplate contract he had signed when he was first starting out, a necessary step to get access to the foundational technology he needed. He hadn't thought about it in years. "I'm aware of the agreement," Alex said, his voice suddenly cautious. "What about it?" "Well," Vance continued, his tone hardening slightly, "I'm calling to inform you that, as of yesterday, my client has activated Section 12 of the Innovate Dynamics Corporate Charter." Section 12? Yes, the Change of Circumstance Clause. It stipulates that in the event of the sale of the primary registered property of a founding majority shareholder, an immediate and comprehensive review of all subsidiary and patent licensing agreements is triggered. The sale of the property at 122 Oakwood Lane, registered to a Mr. George Miller, has triggered this clause. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Alex gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. His father, the property, the company, it couldn't be. My father is a shareholder," he stammered. "Your father," Vance said, the words landing like hammer blows, "is not a shareholder, Mr. Miller. He is the majority shareholder. He and his late wife, Maria, were the primary seed investors in Innovate Dynamics 30 years ago. He owns 52% of the company. And, as of this morning, he has called an emergency board meeting to review what his legal team has identified as multiple, serious violations of the patent licensing agreement by your company." Alex couldn't breathe. His entire business, his entire success, was built on a foundation he had never even known existed. A foundation owned and controlled by the very man he had just dismissed as incompetent. "Violations?" he whispered, his voice a dry croak. "Yes," Vance said, his voice now as cold as a morgue slab. "Unauthorized use of proprietary code, failure to report derivative technologies, and a general breach of good faith. The preliminary legal assessment suggests that the damages could be catastrophic for your company. In fact, it is the opinion of our legal team that Miller Innovations is, for all intents and purposes, an illegal and parasitic entity that has been profiting from our client's intellectual property for years." The phone felt slick with sweat in Alex's hand. He thought of the money in his bank account, the proceeds from the sale of his father's house. The very act that was supposed to secure his future had just triggered its complete and utter annihilation. "An emergency board meeting has been scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Vance concluded. "Your presence is required. I would strongly advise you to bring legal counsel, though, in all honesty, I doubt it will do you much good." The line went dead. Alex sat in his expensive, ergonomic chair, staring at the silent phone. He was a man in a skyscraper who had just realized that the entire foundation of the building was made of dynamite, and he had just, with his own hands, lit the fuse. The trap had sprung, and he was caught, helpless in his cold steel jaws. The 24 hours leading up to the board meeting were a descent into a private hell for Alex. He sat in his office through the night, the city lights glittering mockingly outside his window. He had called his lawyer, a high-priced corporate shark named Peterson, who had listened to the story with a grim, tightening expression. "This is bad, Alex," Peterson had said, his usual bravado gone. "This isn't a negotiation. This is an execution. The Section 12 clause is an old-school poison pill, but it's ironclad. Your father holds all the cards." Alex arrived at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters the next morning, feeling like a condemned man walking to his own execution. The building was an unassuming, elegant tower of glass and steel. a quiet monument to a power he had never known existed. He was led to a boardroom on the top floor. The room was dominated by a long, polished granite table. Seated around it were the board members, a collection of stern, gray-haired men and women who looked at him with expressions of cold disapproval. At the head of the table, in the chairman's seat, sat his father. George was not the stooped, weary man Alex had last seen. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark gray suit, his expression calm, his eyes clear and sharp. He looked like what he was, a man completely in command. Beside him sat Arthur Vance, his face a mask of professional neutrality. "Good morning, Alex," George said, his voice even and devoid of any emotion. "Please, have a seat." Alex sat, his movements stiff. Peterson sat beside him, his briefcase unopened on the table. He knew, as Alex knew, that this was not a legal battle. It was a surrender. "I believe Mr. Vance has already briefed you on the situation," George began, his voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "Innovate Dynamics has found Miller. Innovations to be in gross violation of its patent licensing agreements. The board has spent the morning reviewing the evidence compiled by our legal team. The findings are conclusive." He gestured to Vance, who began to speak, his voice a dry, precise drone that systematically dismantled Alex's entire world. He detailed the specific patent infringements, the unauthorized use of proprietary code, the failure to report derivative technologies. He concluded by presenting the board with a preliminary estimate of the damages owed to Innovate Dynamics. The number was astronomical, far exceeding the value of Alex's company and all his personal assets combined. "In short," Vance concluded, looking directly at Alex, "your company is insolvent. Its only remaining value is its intellectual property, which, as we have established, legally belongs to Innovate Dynamics. The board has voted unanimously to absorb all assets of Miller Innovations as partial payment for the damages incurred." Alex felt the last of the air leave his lungs. His company, his life's work, was gone, wiped out with a single unanimous vote. "But that still leaves the matter of the outstanding damages," George said, his voice cutting through Alex's numb shock. "And the proceeds from the sale of my house." He looked at his son, his expression unreadable. "The money you received from the sale of my home, the home I built with your mother, will be transferred in its entirety to Innovate Dynamics. It will not cover the full extent of the damages, but it will be a start." Alex could only stare, his mind a blank slate of horror. The money he had counted on to secure his future was gone too. "And then there's the matter of your own home, Alex," George continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I believe you took out a rather substantial second mortgage on it to fund your company's last expansion. A mortgage that, without your company's income, you will now be unable to pay." He paused, letting the full weight of his words land. "The bank was, of course, very concerned about the impending default. So, to protect my own investment in this company, I took the liberty of resolving the situation. I bought the mortgage from the bank yesterday afternoon, and this morning I foreclosed on the property." He slid a single document across the polished granite table. It was a deed. "As of 9 o'clock this morning," George said, his voice quiet but carrying the finality of a judge's gavel, "I am the legal owner of your house. I am your new landlord." The room was silent. Alex stared at the deed, at his father's name, at the cold, legal language that had just stripped him of the last vestige of his life. He had lost his company. He had lost the money from his father's house, and now he had lost his own home. He looked up at his father, at the man he had dismissed, betrayed, and tried to discard. He saw no triumph in his eyes, no hint of vengeful glee. He saw only a deep, profound sadness. "Why?" Alex whispered, the word a raw, broken sound. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you needed to learn a lesson, Alex," George said softly. "You needed to learn that some things are not for sale. You needed to learn the difference between a house and a home. You needed to learn what it feels like to have everything you've built, everything you value, taken away from you by someone you're supposed to trust." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "You have 30 days to vacate the premises," he said, his voice once again cool and professional. "I trust you will leave the property in good condition." He turned and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving Alex alone in the silent, empty room, a bankrupt, homeless man who had just been utterly and completely destroyed by the quiet, unassuming father he had so foolishly underestimated. The 30 days that followed the boardroom execution were a blur of humiliating logistics. Alex moved through his life like a ghost, a man stripped of his identity. His company was gone, its nameplate already removed from the lobby of the building he had once commanded. His bank accounts were frozen, his credit cards declined. He and Chloe, in a series of tense, bitter conversations, made the arrangements to separate. She took what was hers, the art, the jewelry, the car he had bought her, and moved in with her sister, leaving him alone in the cavernous, empty house that was no longer his. He spent his days packing his life into cardboard boxes, a grim parody of the task he had so eagerly supervised at his father's garage. Each object he touched was a reminder of his folly. The expensive watch he could no longer afford to service, the tailored suits that now felt like a costume from another life, the framed photos of a happy, successful family that had been a complete illusion. He was a man adrift, with no company, no money, and no home. He was, he realized with a sickening jolt, exactly what he had tried to make his father. A problem to be managed, a life to be disposed of. On the final day, as the moving truck pulled away with the last of his possessions, he received a text from an unknown number. The diner on 4th and Elm. 1 hour. He knew who it was from. The diner was a small, unassuming place, the kind of place his father had always liked. It smelled of old coffee and fried onions. George was already there, sitting in a booth in the back, a cup of black coffee in his hands. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were clear and steady. Alex slid into the booth opposite him. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry," felt laughably inadequate. They sat in silence for a long time. The waitress came and went, pouring coffee for Alex, which he didn't touch. Finally, George spoke. "I'm not here to gloat, Alex," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm not here to watch you suffer." "Then why are you here?" Alex asked, his voice a raw whisper. "Because you needed to be brought to zero," George said. "You needed to lose everything to understand the value of anything. You were a man living in a house with no foundation. I didn't destroy it. I just gave it a push, and it collapsed under the weight of its own emptiness." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "I did not do this to punish you, Alex. I did this to save you." Alex looked at his father, at the man he had so profoundly misjudged. He saw not a vengeful God, but a sad, determined father who'd performed a painful, radical surgery to save his son's soul. "What do you want from me?" Alex asked, his voice breaking. "I want you to answer a question," George said, "and I want you to answer it honestly. What do you want to do with your life? Not the life you thought you were supposed to have, with the big house and the fancy car. Your life, the one that starts today, at 0. Alex had no answer. He had never thought about it. His life had been a series of acquisitions, of escalating goals. He had never stopped to ask himself what he actually wanted, what brought him joy, what gave him meaning. "I don't know," he said, the admission a painful, humiliating release. "Good," George said. "That's the first honest thing you've said in years." He reached into the pocket of his simple, worn jacket and pulled out a set of keys. He slid them across the table. "What's this?" Alex asked. "It's the key to my old house," George said. "Your house now. I've put it in your name. No mortgage. No strings attached." Alex stared at the keys as if they were burning a hole in the Formica tabletop. "And," George continued, "I've set up a small monthly stipend for you, enough to live on simply, enough to pay the bills and buy groceries, not enough for fancy dinners or new cars, enough to give you time." "Time for what?" "Time to figure out the answer to my question," George said. "Time to live in that house, to walk in your mother's garden, to sit in the quiet and listen to yourself for a change. Time to find a foundation." He stood up to leave. "I am giving you a choice, Alex, a choice you never gave me. You can take these keys, take this time, and try to build something real, something that matters. Or you can walk away, try to start over on your own, and see how far your pride takes you." He placed a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffee. "The choice is yours," he said. "For the first time in your life, it truly is." He turned and walked out of the diner, leaving Alex alone in the booth with the keys to his past and the terrifying, liberating possibility of a future he had never imagined. He had been given not a punishment, but a gift, the gift of a second chance, the gift of starting over, the gift of 0. Alex did not leave the diner for a long time. He sat in the booth, the keys to his father's house lying on the table, a small, heavy island in a sea of uncertainty. The choice his father had given him was not a choice between wealth and poverty. It was a choice between his old self and a future he couldn't even begin to imagine. With a trembling hand, he picked up the keys. The first few months in his father's old house were a form of purgatory. The silence was deafening. The small, familiar rooms felt like a prison. He was haunted by the ghosts of a life he had never appreciated. He would see his mother's shadow in the garden, hear his father's quiet footsteps in the hallway. He was surrounded by a love he had discarded, and the weight of it was almost unbearable. He lived on the small stipend his father provided, a humbling, daily reminder of his new reality. He learned to cook for himself, to clean, to manage a budget. He, a man who had once managed multi-million-dollar accounts, now found himself carefully counting out change at the grocery store. He was stripped of everything that had defined him: his title, his wealth, his social standing. He was just Alex, and he had no idea who that was. Driven by a boredom that bordered on desperation, he began to spend time in the one place he had always avoided, the garden. It was overgrown, neglected, a tangle of weeds and dying rose bushes. He started by just pulling weeds, his soft, uncalloused hands quickly becoming sore and blistered. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to change. He found a quiet, meditative rhythm in the work. He learned the names of the plants his mother had loved. He learned the difference between a weed and a perennial. He learned the deep, satisfying ache of a day spent in honest, physical labor. One afternoon, while clearing out a particularly overgrown corner of the garden, he found a small stone bench, almost completely hidden by ivy. He sat on it, his hands covered in dirt, and looked at the house. It was just a small, simple bungalow, but for the first time, he saw it not as a failed asset, but as a home, a place where a family had been raised, where love had lived. He began to work on the house itself, making small repairs. He fixed a leaky faucet. He patched a crack in the plaster. He sanded and repainted the front porch. With each small act of care, he felt as if he were not just repairing the house, but repairing himself. He did not see or hear from his father. The stipend arrived in his bank account on the first of every month, a silent, anonymous reminder of the choice he had made. A year passed. The garden was thriving. The house was clean and well tended. And Alex was a different man. He was quieter, leaner, his face etched with a humility that had replaced his old, arrogant confidence. One day, he found himself drawn to the empty concrete slab where the garage had once stood. He sat on the edge of it, the place where his father's workbench had been, and thought about the inheritance he had lost. He no longer thought of the money. He thought of the craftsmanship, the history, the love that had been poured into every object in that garage. He thought of the rocking chair, the writing desk, the tools. He thought of the rusty old toolbox. He finally understood. The inheritance was not the stocks. It was the work. It was the care. It was the foundation. That afternoon, he went to the local library and checked out a book on basic woodworking. He bought a few simple, second-hand tools, and on the empty concrete slab where his father's sanctuary had once stood, he began to build. He started with a simple birdhouse. His first attempt was clumsy, crooked, but he didn't give up. He tried again and again. He was sitting on the back porch, sanding the pieces for his third and much improved birdhouse, when he heard a familiar crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. It was his father. George got out of his simple, practical car and walked over to the porch. He looked at the birdhouse in his son's hands. He looked at the calluses on his son's fingers. He looked at the quiet, focused expression on his son's face. "It's a good start," George said, his voice soft. "But your joints are a little loose. You need to use a stronger glue." Alex looked up, his eyes meeting his father's. He didn't see a judge or a landlord. He saw his dad. "I know," Alex said, a small, genuine smile spreading across his face. "I was just about to try again." George sat down on the porch step beside him. He didn't offer to help. He just sat, a quiet, supportive presence. "I've been thinking," George said after a long, comfortable silence. "The Maria Miller Foundation is looking for a new director for its restoration and preservation program. It's not a glamorous job. The pay is modest, but it's important work. It's about honoring the past, about teaching a new generation the value of things that are built to last." He looked at his son. "I think you'd be perfect for it." Alex stared at his father, his heart full. He had been given a second chance, not to reclaim his old life, but to build a new one. A better one. "I'd like that, Dad," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he could no longer name. "I'd like that very much." They sat together on the porch as the sun began to set, two men, a father and a son, surrounded by the quiet beauty of a garden reborn. The true inheritance had not been lost in a landfill or hidden in a rusty toolbox. It had been here all along, waiting patiently to be discovered. It was not a treasure to be owned, but a legacy to be earned. And Alex, at long last, was finally ready to claim it.